Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Demystifying Puzzling Application Materials workshop. Today, we're going to go over some different application materials that are commonly seen and requested in different job postings and applications. Just quickly, we'll introduce ourselves. So my name is Emily, and I am the graduate assistant for Rockefeller Careers. I'm located on the downtown campus if you ever need to find me. And I also have office hours on Tuesdays from 12 to 2.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor. I am Emily's counterpart. I am the other grad assistant, although I work on the Uptown campus. I work at a humanities contact office in the basement, Humanities B16. I help a lot with undergrads, but I also help with grad students. So if you ever need assistance on any sort of resume cover letter, which is great, that's the type of thing we're going to talk about today, any of these materials, feel free to come and we will be of help to you. So we are going to get started, and I'm going to just share my screen, and hopefully everybody can see that, right? Awesome. Okay. So what are we going to talk about in this workshop? So we're going to be talking about the differences between a lot of different documents that you might come across in a job or internship application, whether you see things like a cover letter, personal statement, letter of interest, whether you're going to be having to submit an additional writing sample. A lot of times they'll ask for a memo or a research paper to assess your writing skills. You might have to submit a resume. Then you might wonder what a federal resume is, or a CV, especially for those in academia, which we will discuss later. And then references and recommendations are two different things, and we're going to go over what those two documents should look like. So application is a combination of a bunch of different documents coming together to tell your story, to show your qualifications and your experiences. So to submit the best application possible and give you the best shot of getting a job or internship, you want to make sure that you're putting a lot of effort into everything that you're submitting, having that critical attention to detail, looking for the small things, showcasing your best writing, all that stuff. So these are the different things that you are going to encounter. Most likely, it's not limited to this, but these are the most common things you'll run into. Out of all of them, you'll probably see resume and cover letter most often. And so we're going to start with a little comparison between cover letters, personal statements, and letters of interest. So a lot of us have probably heard of a cover letter, might not know exactly what to put in it. So this usually is 1 page in length, and it shows your interest in a specific position. So if you're applying to a specific internship in a certain department, let's say a New York State executive agency, you're going very targeted for that position. Your cover letter should be tailored to it. You should be able to look at the job description and kind of match your cover letter, highlight the skills that they're looking for in that posting. And you're going to see this on most job and internship applications. Another thing that you could be asked for is a personal statement. Those can be 1 to 2 pages. Depending on the prompt, you'll get more specifics with each application and their instructions. And that kind of tells a story. It answers a specific question. Maybe you're applying for a language grant, and the personal statement is about your connection to studying this language in this place. And it's more of a personalized, unique thing. You want to hook your audience in, and that's kind of the personal statement. You'll also see this a lot for graduate and law school applications as well. Then the last thing in this kind of realm of letters and statements is a letter of interest. That's 1 page, and that shows your interest more broadly in the company or organization. You can reach out with this interest, tell them why you're interested in working for them, and you're not applying to like a specific thing. This is what differentiates it from a cover letter. So we're going to go a little bit into detail about each of these things so that you feel prepared on how to submit them. So first, we're going to start with cover letter. Cover letter, it consists of 3 to 4 paragraphs. It goes with your resume, and it gives information to your employer on why you're qualified for that specific job and the reasons you're interested in their organization. So you want to have your heading, you want to have an introduction, salutation, and then your body paragraph is where you want to put the most effort into your cover letter. You want to make sure that these are really, really strong, following the START technique, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But these should highlight your skills, each paragraph should be dedicated to a specific skill relevant to the position to which you're applying. And then it should really show us. It should demonstrate start to finish your involvement in a task and just really give us a good picture of what you were doing. So maybe you were working on a campaign, and I'm going to give a good example of how to demonstrate that experience and skills in the next slide. So I'm actually going to jump ahead to this one because I think we should touch on this. The START technique is very specific to the cover letter body paragraph. It stands for situation, task, action, result, and takeaway. So when you're picking a skill, say your skill is organizational skills, and you want to show an employer, you don't want to just tell them I have great organizational skills. You want to be able to show them. So the best way to do this is use this acronym, and basically each letter in the START acronym can correspond to roughly one sentence in a paragraph. The action sentence can be developed into two because that's really where you're telling them how you did your certain task. So say you want to show organizational skills and you have a campaign experience. Maybe you can tell us about a time where you organized a volunteer effort and how you were able to contact the volunteers, recruit them, how you were able to lead them and tell them what to do, and then the outcome of that action. Were you able to, maybe it's for like a voter drive and you need volunteers for that. But you want to walk us through start to finish your involvement in a specific situation with specific skill. And then just some other general cover letter guidelines. You can match your resume heading or you can format it like a standard business letter. Either one is fine. They're both acceptable, just whatever your personal preference is. You typically want to avoid abbreviations unless they're very common, like New York State. If New York State is all over, NYS is an okay abbreviation to use, that's totally fine. But if there's abbreviations that maybe it's very sector specific, or you want to just make sure that you're writing those full out. Make sure that you're varying your sentence structure. Don't start every sentence with I. That's a really important thing in a cover letter because the cover letter also doubles as a writing sample. So you want to show that you have a really good command on writing skills that could come up in your position. Just a big thing in all caps to emphasize, do not write a generic cover letter. They want to know why you are interested in this particular position. And then also on your cover letter, you don't want to just summarize your resume. Like you might pull from an experience listed on your resume, but you're going to go into so much more detail about your task and your involvement in your cover letter. And you want to focus on what you can offer to the employer. It's great that you've learned things from past experiences, but you really want to show them what you're going to bring to the table. And in the same way that you want to use action verbs on your resume, you want to be action-oriented in your cover letter, using active and not the passive voice, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then always send your cover letter as a separate attachment in a PDF. Don't submit it as like the text of an email. It should be a separate document, just like your resume. And then we're going to be moving on to personal statements. So you might be wondering what a personal statement is. So the great thing about personal statements is they're very customizable. There's no one specific format to writing a personal statement. It depends on whether you're being asked to answer a specific question or go into specific detail about maybe some past experience in your life that you want to share. It's really up to the particular application and posting to which you're applying. So you're going to want to read the instructions carefully and answer the questions. This might be where they give you a word count or a page limit. These types of things will come up in the specific posting. And this is where you really want to tell a story. Sit down, self-reflect. You might be able to like brainstorm a couple different avenues that your personal statement could take, but really you're giving a very personal story. Do your research, make sure you know everything that you're like to which you're applying, what's going to be relevant to talk about, but use specific examples and be unique. You don't want to give a generic personal statement. You want it to have a connection to you, to show your connection to from yourself to which you're applying. And then concentrate on your opening paragraph. You want to be hooked right away. You want to say something to just draw your audience in, make them want to keep reading more. And then if there's any potential shortcomings, address those. And then we have a couple tips as well. Draft, edit, repeat. Our office is more than happy to review personal statements. I know that we've done that in the past and are happy to continue to do so. And showing your best writing Having other people, another set of eyes on your personal statement can help to just catch any other small errors or maybe things that you're not, that make sense to you, but to someone who doesn't have this background, maybe it just needs a little more clarification. That can be helpful. And then with personal statements, you're often limited to a certain word or page limit. So get rid of fluff words. If those words are not contributing to the meaning of your sentence or meaning of your paragraph or letter as a whole, cut them, save the space, and then put something else more meaningful in there. And you want to use your own voice and like avoid cliches. So keeping it simple, positive, active voice, which comes up in cover letters, active voice comes up in personal statements, and we're going to go over the difference and how to catch that. And then the last in this category is a letter of interest. These are very general, and it doesn't respond with the specific posting that might be on Handshake or LinkedIn. It's just a generic interest in, say, working for the American Red Cross. You're not applying to a specific position or an internship position in a certain department for the Red Cross. You might just be interested in working for them as a whole, and you're reaching out, explaining your qualifications, how you see yourself fitting in there, like what kind of skill sets you have, where do you think you would be a good fit, and giving them some background on why you're writing to them. You're taking the time out of your day to write them this letter of interest, so tell them a little bit why, like why are you so interested in the Red Cross? And you would format this kind of similar to a cover letter. So before I move on, is there anything, Emily, that you want to add about cover letters, personal statements, letters of interest? Okay. So moving on to our memos and research papers. A lot of times with internship applications, specifically, you'll see them ask for writing samples. Writing samples can be really common. The writing's a big skill in a lot of these internships. So you might be asked for a memo or a research paper. So generally with a memo, it's 1 page, and you could be given a word count. That's also very application specific. And it argues a specific position or point of view. So I know with in the past cycle for the New York State Senate applications for full-time undergrad interns, they had to submit a memo arguing for, a 1-page memo arguing for a position, and a 1-page memo arguing against the same bill or policy idea for New York State. So they want to show that you want to show in your memo, yes, you can make evidence-based arguments, argue that specific position. With a research paper, this varies entirely. It might be a 5-page sample they ask for, a 7-page, 3-page, totally depends. So you're going to have to see what your specific application is looking for. It demonstrates your writing skills. And if you have a research paper that's really extensive, maybe you wrote a 20-page paper, you can always take an excerpt from that and submit that as your research paper writing sample. So going into a little bit more specifics with the memos, you'll see pro and cons sometimes. Others might just be arguing one position, but making sure that it's evidence-based. Sometimes they don't give you details on how they want you to cite the sources, but using a consistent formatting throughout and making sure that your arguments are backed up, that's really the key in what they're looking for. As far as formatting goes, there's not really a right way to format a memo. There's lots of different ways that people write them. Just be professional and consistent in your formatting and you'll be fine. If they have a specific formatting they request, of course, follow that. But if it's unspecified, just pick a very professional formatting to follow. And definitely demonstrate your best writing skills. Others can proofread this for you. Take advantage of our office here. And then same thing with research papers. You might want to submit a past academic research paper or an excerpt from it. And you want to take that feedback. If you submitted it for a class and the professor has given you feedback, and maybe it was your final paper, and you're not submitting another draft after that, but they still gave some feedback at the end of the semester, you'll want to take that, make the improvements to your paper, and then you can submit it for your application. And we also have a writing center at UAlbany, housed out of the Humanities building on the Uptown campus. That's a really good place to go for some extra assistance and making sure that your writing is really strong, very concise, and that everything is clear. So this is my kind of general tip for all of those documents that came before that are very writing heavy. Passive versus active voice. There is a huge difference when reading documents that are written in passive voice versus active. So passive voice is when the noun or the subject of a sentence is acted upon by a verb. So if you're reading through your cover letter and it says, this required me to, or I was able to, or I have been given, that's, you're giving an impression that you yourself are passive and things are just happening to you. You're not taking the initiative. You're not going out there and getting things done yourself, which is why you want to proofread and switch everything into the active voice if you have a tendency to write in passive voice. Active voice is when the subject or the noun of a sentence is performing an action, that would be the verb, on an object. So you want to start with, I created, or I used this opportunity to, or as a result, I improved. Making sure that you kind of have like that I and the verb together, telling us exactly what skills you were using, making sure that those are the words up front, is going to make a great deal of difference in your elevating your writing in these documents. And it shows the employer that you're taking control of your actions and that this is going to be really a good skill to translate into the position you're applying for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk to us about some resumes.
Yeah, so in this little clump of application materials, we're going to be talking about standard resumes versus federal resumes, and also CVs, which doesn't seem to be in the title. So a standard resume is what you're going to see on most requested by most public and private jobs. And this is going to either be one page. Some employers are starting to open it up to longer than 1 pages, but we'd still recommend if you're an undergrad that you only keep it to 1 page. If you're a graduate with a lot more relevant experience, it seems that employers are saying that they are open to more than 1 page to if you have the skills that they're looking for. So on a standard resume, the information that you're going to include is only going to be relevant to the positions that you're applying for. So even if you worked at, even if you worked as what's a random job that's not, if you were making a career shift, if you worked at a cafe during undergrad and you have other experience that maybe outweighs that experience, then you're going to only include, and you need to get it to 1 page, you're only going to include a campaign that you volunteered on, for example. Your next is going to be a federal resume. This is only used for federal jobs, and that is going to include every experience you've ever done, relevant or irrelevant. This is typically 3 to 5 pages just because it is including everything. It's going to include all of your academia, all of your volunteer experience, anything that you've ever been involved in. For a CV, this is really only relevant to jobs in academia, law, or medicine. And it really focuses on academic experience. So any like conferences, and we'll go into more detail about what academic experience might comprise of. And typically these are also longer because they are including all experience that's relevant. So standard resume. As I said before, it's an overview of your most relevant professional, academic, and extracurricular experience, and it's tailored to the position that you're applying for. So it's common that many people have multiple standard resumes, depending on the jobs that they're applying to or the sectors they're applying to. The most common sections for a standard resume are going to be education, especially if you are a recent graduate or still in school. That's going to be typically your first section. Professional experience, volunteer experience, leadership experience, research, if there's anything relevant, and skills. And we tend to highlight only hard skills, not necessarily soft skills, like computer and language skills, rather than social skills and abilities. So some tips for writing your general resume. You're gonna, like I said before, cater the resume towards the position. You do not need to have one resume that you send out to everywhere. We actually recommend that you have multiple resumes, and that might be helpful if you have a running resume that's maybe 3 to 5 pages, and then you copy and paste the relevant experiences based on what the job description says. We typically recommend 2 to 4 bullets per experience. 1 bullet isn't going to be enough to explain to an employer what you did there and the skills that you used. And 5 might just, sometimes 5 is okay, but for the most part, as you build experiences, 2 to 4 is what we would recommend. You're going to begin each bullet with an action verb. So we never use any pronouns. You aren't the person. You're not saying I wrote a research paper. You would say wrote a research paper, and avoid things like the passive voice Taylor was talking about earlier. Avoid things like responsible for or duties included. Start those bullets with the actual skill or duty that you did. Formatting should stay consistent. Don't use a resume template. Oh, I know it's very tempting because they're very pretty. But in our field in public service, we recommend that you do not use a template. We also recommend that you don't use any graphics, photos, or colored texts, and quantify where you can. If you were a teacher, how many kids were in your classroom? If you were a supervisor, how many people were on your team? If you did research, quantify all of those experiences, and always have it in reverse chronological order per section. So your professional experience is going to be reverse chronological order, and your education is going to be as well. A federal resume. So as a reminder, it's of all professional, academic, and extracurricular activities, just because federal jobs include more of a background check and want to know everything you've been involved with. And so they're usually 3 to 5 pages. And we have a little resource there for you, which I will do in the next slide, introduce in the next slide. Tips for a general resume, or a federal resume. Oh my goodness. So you're gonna cater towards the position. You're gonna include action verbs that are relevant to the position. It's gonna include accomplishments. It's gonna be reverse chronological order, just like a standard resume. Typically, it's every job you held for the last 10 years. So if you're a recent graduate that only has a couple of years experience, you're gonna include all of your experience. If you're someone who's gone back to school or you've been out of school for a while, you're just gonna do those last 10 years. You're also, what's unique to a federal resume is you're gonna include the hours completed in your education experiences. So this is not standard in a normal resume. But you're going to say the completed credit hours when you're in your education section. You also are going to include your citizenship. You're going to include your supervisor's name and indicate if it's okay to contact them. You're also going to include how many hours per week you've worked in each experience. Numbers impress hiring managers. Like I said, quantify everything. That's not just unique to a standard resume. And salaries are unique to federal resumes. But here we have USA Jobs has a resume builder, and that is a great way to get started if you have to, for the first time ever, create a federal resume. You would just go to usajobs.com, and under documents, you can create, there's a resume builder, and you can have up to 5 resumes in that portal. A CV is the last one in this clump of application materials. And this is really stressing your academic experience. There's no page limit, although it's usually 2 to 4 pages. And you'll see that these section headings are a little bit different than a standard resume because they're going to include things like articles and publications, any conferences or presentations that you've attended, any research you've completed, affiliations, grants and fellowships that you've attained, teaching experience, and any awards that you may have won. Some tips for a CV. You're going to highlight, as always, the skills that are most relevant to the job you are seeking. So although you're including everything, you're really catering those action verbs towards the job position. Again, starting with action verbs, you're not using any personal pronouns. It is also common when you don't have a page limit to change up the formatting and maybe include more white space, but we actually recommend not to include a lot of white space. I would still keep it pretty standard with single space formatting and normal margins. And we already went over some of the unique sections to CVs. And our last differentiation is letters of recommendation versus references. So letters of recommendation are specifically addressed to a position applied for. They're usually sent in with an application. So, and if you're applying to schools, fellowships, those kind of things, usually in the application materials, they'll request a letter, 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And this letter will usually emphasize the skill sets and knowledge for the position that you're applying for, or the school you're applying for, or degree you're applying for. References are a little different in that they're pretty general. If you have a letter of reference, then it's usually written more about your character and your abilities and your goals rather than your ability for this specific position. And this is common after you're considered, so after an interview or after, it's not usually initial, although you can sometimes send in a reference page, which would be separate from your resume, which we'll talk about in a little bit. A letter of recommendation, normally used by schools or employers, asking why this person is uniquely qualified for the position and what they would bring. Some tips towards attaining a letter of recommendation is usually on the application, they will specify who they want a letter of recommendation from. This is really important. Some schools or fellowships want professors, some schools and only academic recommenders. But some want a supervisor, some allow personal acquaintances, some do not allow personal acquaintances, some specify a specific number that they'll accept from each. So this is really important to keep an eye out for. You're going to also ask your recommender well in advance of the due date and instructions on how to send it, because some of them, usually with a letter of recommendation, the person that's writing that letter will send it in on their own versus a reference, which you would send that in. And sometimes it's through a portal or an email address. So those are really important instructions to give. I'm sure also if it's a professor or somebody who has many students under their belt, that usually the application periods are in the same timeline. So it's just standard respect to give them a decent amount of time to get it in. Then you're also going to want to send your recommender a detailed explanation of the position you're applying to and why you're interested. As much as, you know, I'm sure this person knows you, that's why you're asking for a letter of recommendation from this person. It's always helpful for them just to know a little bit about why you are qualified for this position, remind them any projects that you did if it's a professor in their class, remind them anything that you want them to mention, just because you might have a different idea than they might have. And lastly, send a thank you after they've sent it in. Make sure to thank everybody that ever writes a letter of recommendation for you. References. So these are normally used by employers to verify your work ethic and character. So not so much focused on those specific skill sets and your goals, but just verifying that you are a reliable person, you are who you said you are, and a lot more general. So some tips on attaining a reference. Inform your references that you'll be applying to positions in a certain time frame, and ask them permission before you include anybody on a reference page. So a reference page is also going to be a separate document from your resume or CV. You'll never on your resume have a line that says references can be available upon request. They know that, they will ask for that if they want it. So there's no need to use up that space to say it. Your references will be not attached to your resume, but like I said, a separate document. And I don't think I have the formatting there, but maybe we can send that out. They will likely be contacted after an interview or once considered a finalist. And usually these are via email or phone. Sometimes they request a letter of reference, but for the most part, it's going to be a different format. And then, like before, it's remind your references about your goals and interests, stay in touch with them, keep them apprised of your process. And lastly, send a thank you. If you get any offers for any of the positions, you should be thanking everybody and keeping them updated on your journey. All right. Any last questions? Any questions in general?
and we'll be happy to stay on after and answer any questions. But if there's nothing for now, this is a slide. It's got our office hours on it. Emily and I, we have appointments available on Handshake. Joan Martha does as well. And then my office hours are on Thursdays. Emily's on Tuesdays. Joan's on Wednesdays. Whatever works best for you, just let us know. We're happy to help you with any of these materials. And if there's no last question, we'll say thank you so much for attending and have a great rest of your evening.